We all have an opinion, and I have the right to say that you're wrong. And the moment I say you are wrong, you call me intolerant of your idea because you think my idea is God-given and a right. And if you differ with me, you are intolerant of my idea.
You use this old strategy to believe that your views are superior, and all these stupid other people around you don't know what they're speaking about. You can disagree, but to call people dinosaurs simply because they disagree, I think is not on for me.
Hello, my name is Donald, and welcome to the #1 media company, WorldView. At WorldView, we explore everyone's perspectives on all things that can broaden our worldview. Just a quick note, I have a bit of a cold today. That's my eyes are a bit red and my voice is a bit hoarse. So don't worry, I haven't turned into a vampire. I just have a bit of a cold. Today's discussion is going to be very interesting, a debate on the legacy of apartheid. 28 years have passed since apartheid as we know it was formally abolished. Can we still blame it for the problems of today? Have South Africans moved on, or does the legacy of apartheid still hold us back? Joining us is an exciting panel that will help us answer all of these questions. We have the CEO of AfriForum, Kallie Kriel. Kallie is, of course, the AfriForum is, of course, a very powerful South African civil rights organization. And then we have the outspoken Dr. Piet Croucamp, who is also a lecturer at Northwest University. So Piet, I'm going to throw the controversial question to you, and I'd love to hear your opinion. It's been 28 years since the fall of apartheid. Can we still blame it for the problems of today?
Well, Donald, you give away a word of your ideology behind it. First of all, it's an old chestnut introduction to a sentence. It's been 28 years. And then the second thing that you give away is when you say, can we still blame it on apartheid? So I know now I got some idea where your head is standing too. I think you and the white civil rights movement, Kallie Kriel, is in agreement at least with the questions, as far as the questions are concerned. Okay, I think blame is the wrong word because I think not even the ANC, and I'm talking about those in a position of making decisions and changing things, not even them, I think, well, some of them still from time to time do, but generally it's not ANC policy anymore to blame the ANC. I think we have accepted the fact that we ruined our prospects, we ruined our capacities. I spoke to Davy Rood last night and he said to me, if we grew at 4%, which is quite possible in the South African economy, we would have doubled our gross domestic product in South Africa. We would have doubled the size of the economy. Every person in South Africa would have at least double the annual income that they have now. So yes, we have ruined pretty much most of what we could have been, and we are, in world terms, we are certainly declining comparatively. The question now is, and I think that's where you want to focus, is the question is, what is responsible for this? And does what we did during the years of apartheid, does it still have an impact? It certainly has an impact. I think societies are molded over millennia. And eventually you become the impacts and the influences in the system that you had over time. You will be the result of all that. There's no doubt about that. I don't think there's a single society, not even American politics. If you look at the large number of people that get murdered at schools in America, it's got everything to do with the civil rights movement. It's got everything to do long before that with the Civil War in America and the right to bear arms and the militarization of American culture. So yes, the history indeed do define you. It does tell us something of what you are. Let me just give you one example in South Africa, and I'm sure there are plenty. And I'm not saying, yes, we can blame the past on what is happening in the present. But I'm saying the traces of the past is always present in the immediate as well. So 63% of all children in South Africa have no clue who their father is or where he is. If you want to map that, and you can look at Botswana and Zimbabwe and other countries just a little bit north of us, there's a different pattern there. And there's no doubt in my mind that some of that origin at least must come from the homeland policy. What we did is we said Black South Africans only have rights in homelands and they must live there. Then we extract the men to come and live in the mines and in industries to build the apartheid economy. So what we do, we break up the black family. Then we liberate the policy a little bit and we say, now the women can also come and work in various places. But for obvious reasons, the women don't necessarily go and work where their husbands are. They work where they find a job. So now the children are often left behind in the homeland area. So we've broken up the black family. And even today in the black middle class family, you see exactly the same thing. The men are absent, broken families. In 63% of the cases, there are no men in that family. It's a single parent household. And in almost 50% of those cases where it's a single parent household, it's not necessarily the biological mother. That's the parent. So if you want to understand what is one of the things, and there's no doubt in my mind, and I think I've seen enough research to confirm that a broken family eventually leads to higher crime levels. It leads to teenage pregnancies. It leads to all the social evils, or a large number of the social evils that you have in society, where there's high crime rate, drug abuse, broken families. It leads to, or it originates in the family structure for many, many years. And that's my last point here. For many years, and I think that's what is tragic about American politics. Until about Reagan, or perhaps just after Reagan, the key word in every American election was, it is about family values. Have you noticed that the Americans don't say that anymore in the election, national election campaigns? The same thing in South Africa. If you want to find the root of the violence, the conflict, the fragmentation in South Africa, the destruction of the black family lies right at the root of that. Yes, so in that respect, we are a bit of our past too, but I won't use the word blame, and I certainly won't introduce it the way you introduced the question. Yes.
Thank you, Piet. Yeah, I think this will boil down to a question of relativity. So obviously, I think no one will say apartheid has nothing to do with the problems of today, but it will be an argument of 10%, 20%, 40%, 70%. But yeah, Kallie, I'd love to give you an opportunity to deliver your opinion.
Yeah, thank you, Donald, and thank you, Piet. I just want to make one correction. Piet referred to the White Civil Rights Organization. We're an inclusive Afrikaner civil rights organization, and there is a difference in that regard. I'm going to start off by agreeing with Piet with regard to the value of family. And I think many of the ills that we see is because we don't have strong families as a foundation on which we can build a society. When it comes to apartheid, and that is why I'm very glad that we have this debate, because it gives us an opportunity to have a nuanced debate. Because a nuanced debate is not always necessary. If I take an example just with regard to your question, is if we say, can we blame apartheid for what is happening today, then naturally people would want an answer to say yes or no. And that, of course, is not possible. If you're going to say no, then, of course, people will say you're an apartheid denialist, you're denying the infringement on the dignity of people that we've seen that have also led to a lack of self-confidence in many regards. If you say yes, then you go to the other pole to say, we look at this problem as something outside of ourselves. And if something is outside of yourself, you cannot solve it. And so I would rather want to answer this question in a developmental way, and to say, should we blame apartheid for the ills that we see today? And developmentally, the problem is if you go that route to say, and your argument is who did what to us, and then the solution is what are we going to do to them today? Then you're not going to find a solution. So even though you recognize the infringement of the dignity of people, if you say, well, we should not blame apartheid, because that creates circumstances where you can ask another question, to say what role did we play in terms of coming to the position we are today, but then the solution is what can we do to solve this problem? And you can look at history. There are many examples. If you look at Japan after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, You had lots of reason for anger by the Japanese people towards the Americans. And of course, that anger probably did not go away. But what they said is, we are in this situation now, what can we do ourselves? And they did not westernize. They decided to use what was modern in the Western world that could be used, but they stuck to their culture. And we know a few years ago the economy has changed, but Japan became an economic powerhouse. And the same applies in terms of Afrikaner history. To this day, you will find people that are very negative towards what happened during the Anglo-Boer War, the concentration camps. And after the war, Afrikaners were negative about the British, and as I've said, in some sense, still today. But what did not happen after the Anglo-Boer War is you did not go to the British to say, you did this to us, you have to now solve the situation. You had things like the Help Mekaar beweging, Help Each Other movement that came after the rebellion of 1914. Then you had the Economische Volkscongress, the Economic People's Congress, to say, what can we as a community do to come out of this situation? And if we blame the British, we would have said, you know, you have to give us shares in Barclays Bank and we have to take over the bank. But because the answer was something else, was to say, let's build our own bank, the Volkskas and all those kind of issues. And if we're going to solve the problems, and there are many problems in the country today, we need to make sure to say, what are we going to do now? And that is where AfriForum is focusing. And I think family is something that Piet mentioned is important. Education is important. If we have 80% of schools that are dysfunctional, and you can blame apartheid for it, but you can also say today you have the South African Democratic Teachers Union that has a hold on schools, making sure that there is no discipline, and you have teachers that aren't in classes. Then you are able to say we need to address these problems rather than blaming someone else.
But Piet, it seems like, okay, if I'm paraphrasing Kallie correctly, he's sort of saying we need to accept what went wrong in the past and move on. But it seems like a lot of white people struggle to accept what went wrong during apartheid and accept responsibility for that.
Yeah, I don't find the way that Kallie think about these things interesting, because I'm quite familiar with it. Listen carefully to what he says. He used the analogy of the Boer War. It was a foreign force, foreigners, that has done the harm to Afrikaans people. As if the same analogy applied to South Africa, as if when black people ask white South Africans to become part of the solution and address the problems of the past, as if they talk, it's a foreign relationship. You see this thing when white South Africa and black South Africa defines your historical frame of mind, how you think about it. We're talking about South Africans doing things to South Africans. We're not talking about black people doing things to white people from a foreign country. It's two very, very different things. So the analogy of the Boer War doesn't work. It's a different, I don't know, but it does tell you how they see that. You will also see how they see the solution. The solution is do something for ourselves again first. And then we will reach out in some humanitarian way to other societies and help where we can within the means of our resources available. I'm not sure if that's the way to solve the problems. I'm not even sure if that is the way to explain the past of South Africa. But if your explanation of how did we get here is so completely distorted and wrong, how will we ever find a consensus to fix the problems of South Africa? Well, we found a constitution in the between 1990 and 1994 and eventually 1996, which is a form of a compromise which accepts that we have done things wrong in the past without necessarily laying the blame very specifically at somebody's door, and we said, let's build on this. And the ANC ruined it to such an extent for all South Africans that it's almost impossible for us to say now, what is the damage of apartheid? What's the damage of the ANC government? It's not possible to pull this thing apart and say, okay, this part is to blame on apartheid and this part is to blame on the ANC. The ANC has ruined it. It's so completely ruined that I don't think an analysis makes a lot of sense. But let me put it to you this way. If we're going to solve this problem, and I listened to Corne Mulder the last few days, because we talk a lot about coalition politics in South Africa. And he's from the Freedom Front. For all practical purposes, not too far from the mindset of Kallie. But he's got a very interesting and a very pragmatic mind about it. I'm sure if he talks on behalf of his party, he will still define South Africa as white and black, and the history, the way that Kallie defines it. Maybe he will. But the way that he goes about in solving the problems of South Africa, he's got a very, very different attitude. He doesn't prey on this historical thing about blacks being foreigners and whites occupying South Africa, or whites owning South Africa. And now we somehow have to reach a sort of a compromise which bring black South Africans into the fold of the political system. He doesn't have that mind. The way that Kallie phrased the history, and the way that he phrased the future, and he phrased the solution, it is incredibly problematic. And if you don't find a form of a consensus between all South Africans about where we are, it's going to be difficult to be part of the solution. Let me just, one last thing. I said that maybe we as South Africans must admit that we stole the land from black people. Because in a sense, yes, if you look at the legislation that prevented black South Africans from owning a business, from owning land in white South Africa, the forced removals, then we must say, yes, we acted in a way which could be construed as stealing the land. It's not only what I think what happened, it's also what other people who were the victims, what they think about it. And if we argue, okay, good, the process eventually deprived black people of the land, and it's possible for them to define it as theft. Okay, so now we can talk about ownership in South Africa. We can redefine it, but we can lay down the basic principle that ownership is important. The one way of empowering black South Africans is by giving them ownership. But you stigmatize the notion of ownership if you keep on denying that ownership had played a role in the past as well. So just the thing about Corne Mulder, I find it interesting, the pragmatic way with which he goes about in explaining our contemporary conditions and the solution to the future. Because in some other way, and I may be wrong about him, he has changed his mindset from thinking that this land used to belong to whites and now we have to accommodate black people too. And that, I think, if you listen to Kallie's narrative about the history, the analogy with England, is also blacks had been excluded. It was our country. Now we have to compromise. And how will we do it? It will be on our terms. And that will be the future.
Go ahead, Kallie.
No, I don't know if it's my English that is bad or Piet is simply
it is not too good, but it's okay.
It's simply not listening. Something we definitely don't do, and that has been the case over the last 16 years of AfriForum's existence, is to frame the whole situation in the country in terms of black and white. That is a pre-1994 way of looking at things. And we had a relook on to say, if as a cultural community, we want to survive, but also make sure that we create circumstances where all communities have a future for their children, how do we take this on? And we're not ashamed about the fact that we are mainly Afrikaner organization. That is something totally different that what happened during the Apartheid era, when people identified themselves as simply white. There are nuances towards this. And we also don't see ourselves in isolation towards other communities in this country. And, one can say this, and Piet might not hear me, but let's just go with regard to our track record. In terms of what we are busy with at the moment, we see that there is a failure of government. We see in terms of our history that the best way, if you don't have a government that looks after your interests, is to start looking after your own interest. We cannot impose the solution on other communities, but when other cultural communities also want to go that route, we are going into cooperation. For instance, In this coming week, we will sign a cooperation agreement with the Seleka Barolong community in Nogas Post. Princess Gabu, who's now going to be crowned on the 10th of September, we have an agreement to say we're not going to be paternalistic. I think Afrikaners have tried to be paternalistic in the past. That fails. We don't know what's best for everybody in the country. But we can cooperate with communities to say we might differ on many issues, but if you differ on 100 issues and you agree on one issue, it should be possible to cooperate. And we've had our second harvest now, or going to have our second harvest in the near future in that specific community. And then I can name numerous other local communities where we cooperate. It's in Pongola, with a Zulu community there. It is in Nkungumati with the Zulu community that we cooperate there. We see there are different factors. There are alpha and beta factors. The beta factors are those that we can influence, but they are beyond our control. We cannot tell the ruling party who they should appoint in prominent positions, and we know there's cadre deployment. You can take on those issues in court, but then you have to focus on the alpha factors, those that you have total control over, or a lot of control over, and that is to say, let's take this self-help concept and build it and get self-strong, self-reliant communities in the country that cooperate with one another. And this is not a Afrikaner thing only. If you look at the Xhosa language, it has a term called Vukuzenzele, which says stand up and do it yourself. And these concepts are in all cultural groups. And the problem is, and also in Afrikaner history, we had this self-help program, but we lost the plot during the apartheid years where we became government reliant. And if you're government reliant, you become a victim of history. If you can't anymore call the member of parliament to have something solved in your community, and you accept we are reliant on government, then you're dead in the water. Then you'll become a victim of history. But if you say, well, we can do a lot of stuff ourselves within the framework of the law. And that is the way to go, we believe, even though if we have a government today that has the political will, we don't have enough resources for people to be dependent on government. So we need to foster this, and this is something that exists in cultural communities, and this is what we are going to promote. This is within our power. And the funny thing is you actually have two worlds. If you look at Twitter, you would think our country is on the brink of civil war. But if you work with normal people on grassroots level, you find that the vast majority of people are socially conservative and want to create a future for their children. That gives you a basis to work on. So you have a lot of noise by the political elite and political fights going on, but we should not, it's like Twitter, we should not think that is the South Africa we live in. If you just go down to grassroots level, there's a lot of goodwill, and we see it in all our 165 branches. Okay. We operate with communities because there is a willingness to do that. Because I think people are desperate. We have a reason to be desperate, but we can have a solution if we take on the problem ourselves.
Piet?
Donald, either Kallie didn't prepare for this discussion or is very nervous because he talks about a lot of unrelated things, many a year. But just one thing in response to what he's saying. But listen carefully. I'm out of the business of mapping the Afrikaner mind. I myself don't think of myself as an Afrikaner. I happen to be Afrikaans speaking, but I have good news for myself, and that is that the vast majority of even Afrikaans speaking white South Africans don't think of themselves primarily as an Afrikaner. But if you listen carefully to what Kallie says, And it's as if they keep on stepping in that pile of poop without noticing it even. They keep on hammering about the things that drives us apart, that is the difference between us. But the future of South Africa lies in what we have in common. The Constitution is one master narrative that we have in common. There's not a single survey that has shown that there's any significant degree of disloyalty by any significant group in South Africa towards the Constitution. The Constitution guarantees ownership. It allows for the free market economy. It allows for good governance. It allows for the separation of powers. It's all the things that we agree about. But by keep on emphasizing the things that could be different among us, allow Kallie to justify why they can operate in isolation as Afrikaners. But the future of South Africa, and I have no doubt about it, the whole process of modernity walks and works away from ethnicity, away from the particular to the universal. If you look at Europe, if you look at the Americas, it's what those countries have in common. If you look at the Western political economy, the fact that they have different languages, different religions, doesn't matter. It's what they have in common that will eventually drive their future. That is the one problem that Putin has in Russia. His emphasis on what is making us different from the Ukrainians, the Lithuanians, and the Turkish and whatever. Eventually, he will have to conform to what we have in common. And the sooner Kallie and the dinosaurs in this Afrikaner, this narrow definition of who is important and who should be in relation to another, the sooner they walk away from that historical conception of we are special, we are different, we are God-given, the sooner they can start emphasizing what we have in common. The solution in South Africa is in what we have in common, not what makes us different.
Maybe if I can respond just by saying, you know, if I listen to Piet, it seems he's stuck in the pre-1994 years. And if he says that my answers are irrelevant, I was responding to a statement he made. So that means the statement he made would be irrelevant, because he said, as AfriForum, we are isolating ourselves. And who said that we ever believe that we are special? We are like any other community that have made mistakes, that will make mistakes in the future, but that wants to make a difference. And if you look at all these groupings that attack us, and we're just saying, put the track record there. You know, Nel tells me that 95% of the people that approach him for assistance are Black people, and we assist those people. So now to say that we are living in isolation and we are dinosaurs, I think in fact we are on top of what are the trends in this country at the moment. This country is not a country that where culture plays no role. In fact, culture brings energy. And the fact that there was, if you look at the Constitution, if Piet says we have to focus on the Constitution, then he must focus on the whole Constitution that says we are united in diversity. That means if you really support the Constitution, you should have tolerance towards diversity and see how can we foster this diversity towards the greater good. But the problem we have is that the left have become increasingly intolerant towards any other view. If Piet says he's not an Afrikaner, that is his fullest right, and I will support him.
Why am I left now? Why am I left now? Why do you call me left?
Because
how do you call me left? If you're not an Afrikaner, you're left. How do you get to that logic? Why am I left?
Because we see in your arguments the intolerance that we see in the left all over the world is that
disagreement is intolerance.
It's definitely intolerance. If you're going to call people that love their identity, if you're going to call them dinosaurs, that is intolerance, Piet. I think we should really, if we want unity and diversity, and not call people names and call them dinosaurs. I would be glad if you're not on the left, because if you're a liberal, and
I'm not a liberal, so don't make a point about it. I'm not even a liberal.
Okay, but the fact is, if you
now you're without labels, eh?
No,
you're running out of labels.
No. then you are more.
What am I next? What will I be next?
You are more than capable then to tell us who you are. We know you're not an Afrikaner, but I think the modern conservative views, and this is not Trumpism, but also classic liberalism, which is not what we're seeing in the world today, are both that would be tolerant for various views. And in terms of the classical liberalism, there is a view to say we should allow various views and not see other people's views as inferior. If you say we are dinosaurs, you use this old strategy to believe that your views are superior, and all these stupid other people around you don't know what they're speaking about. You can disagree, but to call people dinosaurs simply because they disagree, I think is not on for me.
Who did I call a dinosaur?
You said these dinosaurs that are sticking to this old concept of culture.
I do think that the idea is a very old idea. That's true. But let me just. I think we should move on to real questions. But let me just say one thing. I think, Kallie, the days when the head of the house will sit at the end of the table, and the moment anybody else in authority, those days are over, man. It's long gone. We all have an opinion, and I have the right to say that you're wrong. And the moment I say you are wrong, you call me intolerant of your idea because you think my idea is God-given and right. And if you differ with me, you are intolerant of my idea. In fact, we live in this universalism that I appeal to. It says that we all have the same views. When my children was 5 years old, I told them that for 95% of the day, we are just two people. My word is not more worth more than yours. 5% of the day, I will take responsibility for the fact that you're young and that other people can exploit you. But from there on, we're just two human beings. So you don't call me intolerant of your idea because I'm telling you wrong. And you must admit that I try to give you some facts and figures on why you are wrong. I'm not saying you're wrong and you must take my word for it like you want me. Either you agree with me or you're intolerant of my ideas. But let's just get the narrative. We're talking about a universal narrative. We have all the same voices and all the same ideas. And we all could be wrong and we all could be right. You can also be wrong. It's very possible that you are very, very wrong. And I can point you towards the areas where I think you are wrong. Do not accuse me of being intolerant of your patriarchal, fatherly, head of the table views that should be respected. I don't respect a single bloody view. I only respect the empirical value of that view, the evidence of that view. I do not respect your view because you are Kallie, or because you are Ernst Roots, or because you are AfriForum. I have my own views, and the only difference between me and you is the way that we substantiate our views, and one of us is going to be wrong and one is going to be right. That's all.
No, Piet, I never said you cannot say I'm wrong. I think that is your fullest right to...
You call me intolerant when I say you're wrong. You keep calling people who are different from you intolerant.
No, I can call you wrong. You can call me wrong. It's because
but not intolerant. Not intolerant. You say I'm intolerant. That's a value adjustment you make.
Gentlemen,
every time people disagree with you, you call them intolerant.
I just remind you, the topic of this debate is not a legacy of apartheid. But please continue, Kallie.
I just want to say to Piet, I would want to agree with him, but then we would both be wrong.
It's easy. Just get the facts. No problem, and you'll agree with me.
Yeah, then you have to have, Piet, if you want the facts, look at the World Value Survey that is done also in South Africa. There you will see clearly that we are not living in this universal worlds where we are only individuals. The facts show that in this society, we have socially conservative, the majority of people, which take their identity, they feel strongly about that. But we need to foster that. And that is why I'm saying, if you look at two poles to say, You either have to, if you're an Afrikaner, you have to hate other people and you will only have to look at your own interests, or on the other side, to be part of a broader whole, you have to say, I'm not an Afrikaner. We say the answer is in the middle, that you can. We can go a third way to say, you can look after your identity, but you can then still to look after other issues of common concern. And we are not patriarchal in a sense. If you one of our bigger campaigns at the moment are the whole question of violence against women and children. And we even, Jaco Swart, you know, the guy that abused his wife, we are taking that on because we live in the 21st century where we don't have patriarchal society that looks down on women and children. We believe that we should have a society where everybody can play their role, but can still be proud of their specific identity.
Piet, anything you want to add?
No, I think that one has been exhausted. We can move on if you want to.
Okay, but gentlemen, on this issue, the Constitution of South Africa, one can argue, obviously, it was a creation after the end of apartheid. Do you think, because obviously this plays into everything that we now, or perhaps we should have spoken about, but the legacy of apartheid, it was at the end of apartheid, the Constitution was created. Is it time that the Constitution should be amended? Is this an answer to many of the problems we still see today and the problems of the past? Piet?
Well, the Constitution is a perfect compromise document. It's actually a very colonial document. I often, my colleagues and guys in the ANC that I know, I find it curious how they can be so protective of the Constitution sometimes. It's a perfect colonial document. It's a bit of Germany, a bit of Canada, a bit of Switzerland, a bit of the American system, a bit of the British system. There's almost nothing African in that document. It's a compromise between two contending sets of elites. And the history of statehood in Europe was that the state almost boiled to the top. It was as a consequence, the Constitution developed as a consequence of the real will of the people in societies where there were a great degree of consensus about the greater good. We don't have that benefit about a real consensus about the greater good, so we selected bits and pieces from various constitutions in the world, we formulated it in the form of a compromise, and now we seek to impose it as a form of a general will on society. So it's a little bit more complicated process. That's why we refer to the state building process or the constitutional embedded process. It's evolving over time. Maybe it works over 40 and 50 years. It obviously didn't work well over 28 years, even though I think we've made some good progress in some areas as well. But the Constitution and its sustainability is heavily reliant on what we have in common. And the Constitution do make provision for diversity. That's why you have provincial authorities. That's why if you want to amend the Constitution, you need the buy-in of 6 of the 9 provinces, for instance. It does accommodate diversity. It doesn't mean that diversity is completely unimportant. It doesn't mean we all suddenly think the same. We don't think the same. But eventually, it is a compromise, and the future of South Africa is heavily reliant on the sustainability of that compromise. And that's why I say, let's just look at the things that we have in common. I think I shared the idea about land ownership, for instance, with Kallie in some ways. I don't share the same historical narrative of how we got to where we are. But I think land, I think assets, I think ownership is of fundamental importance for economic freedom. But I do understand that the inequality in South Africa is unsustainable. I do understand that white South Africans had been middle class for a number of generations. Black South Africans largely first generation middle class. And they do not pass on the benefit of that middle class necessarily to the next generation. It takes time. You need to develop what David Rood likes to refer to as a demographic dividend. In other words, access to capital, access to assets, access to good education, access to good medical care. Those things are new to those who've been excluded in the past from the benefits of good governance. So we are at a very different point. And in that respect, we are different. Our real differences lie in inequality. It lies in access to a demographic dividend, to good education, to good medical services. Our real differences do not lie in the fact that we're Afrikaans, English, Xhosa, Zulu. And that's, you sometimes get the idea that that's where Kallie's focus is. First of all, we're Afrikaners. And you are now the colored people of the Western Cape. We will co-opt one of your members, one of your esteemed members, and we will pay him a nice salary to which he can't say no to. And then we will co-opt you into our model of Afrikaners and colored people and brown people and yellow people and black people. And then that provides the momentum for our own existence. But that is by emphasizing our differences. The Constitution is, the real strong point of the Constitution is the degree of consensus that exists about it. And that consensus is embedded in the fact that the future is about our universal interests. That doesn't mean that in 50 years, although I don't think there will be many Afrikaners left in 50 years, but it doesn't mean that in 50 years we won't have some of the diversity that we have now and that it won't be important. It just means that we cannot build our future on what we disagree about. We have to build our future on what we agree about.
Just quickly, if I heard you correctly, you mentioned that the Constitution was not very successful for the past 28 years.
No, I didn't say that.
Okay, but
I think we weren't very successful implementing the Constitution.
Oh, okay. So you think it's a great document?
The ANC made a mess of it. The ANC ruined it. The ANC, much of the fuel that propels Kallie's mindset has come from the fact that the ANC has ruined it. So the justification for doing it yourself, which I understand why they do it, because the ANC has ruined it. If they don't do it themselves, who else is going to do it? I understand, but that doesn't justify it. It's the unintended outcome of it. The ANC has to be blamed for the fact that Kallie is effective, ironically, isn't it?
Kallie?
No, Peter, I'm glad you say we're effective, but it's not simply myself. I think there's a growing concern, not only amongst Afrikaners, but amongst all communities. And that is why we see this kind of cooperation coming forward. With regard to the Constitution, we should always see that the Constitution is a tool from which we should build the future on. And that the Constitution in itself, if it is just left in a shelf somewhere, will not save us. And if you look at the US Constitution, which has not changed over more than 100, nearly 200 years, what is happening?
They've changed it. I think that I stand to be correct, but I think there have been 14 changes to that Constitution.
Yeah, various amendments.
More or less, you still see that the same articles are differently interpreted in terms of what is happening in society. So our view is to say the Constitution is there, and that we use in courts whenever we believe the Constitution is infringed upon. But you cannot say the Constitution in itself will lead to prosperity. Prosperity will be built when you make sure that you have well-educated people that are able to participate in the new economy. We have a skills mismatch in a sense that because we have 80% of schools that are dysfunctional, you can have all these affirmative action measures in place. If you're not going to have children that go to a good school, like my children go to, my children we are fortunate they are able to be taught in their mother tongue, so they are able much more easily than somebody doing it in their second language to have maths concepts and science concepts to master those concepts, and they are equipped to participate. So if I could change one thing in this country, I think the best way is we have to intervene into schools. And that is, Piet mentioned the Cape Forum. By the way, we did not co-opt, he didn't mention Heinrich Weingart's name, but Heinrich actually came for a smaller salary than what he earned, because he had to leave quite a few jobs in the media because he can't be a role player and then also interpret what is happening to the news. But if we take, for instance, the Cape Forum, which is, by the way, not colored only organization. I'm a member of the Cape Forum, and many other people that that see themselves as Afrikaners are also. There are English-speaking people that support it. But if we want to make sure that we take on, for instance, the poverty issue in the colored community, we're looking at bursaries for people to study further. But you only have about 700 people completing matric in the colored community that are able to go to university. And now you have all these universities that are competing to get these students. But what about those children that don't finish school, that gets involved with gangs because there's simply no other life options for them available? And that
sorry, Kallie, is it necessary to have so-called colored-only organizations or so-called Afrikaner-only organizations? Why can't it be a South African organization? Why does it have to be this sort of focus?
In terms of the reality, because paternalism is the evil of colonialism. It was the evil of apartheid, and it can also be the evil today. If Kallie Kriel sits here and Piet said at the head of the table, we would rather have a round table. I can never, as Kallie Kriel, go into Mitchell's Plain and tell them, listen, people, your savior has arrived. I'm going to now tell you what to do to uplift this community. That would be the worst ever paternalism. So what we can do is to say we want to cooperate with communities on an equal basis. We cannot prescribe to anybody, but if people want us to assist, we've made mistakes, so we can say what not to do, but we've also had successes to give information on what works. But we can be idealistic about this and say, we are all universal. Piet should be able to go into Soweto and tell the people, listen, this is the solution. On grassroots, it doesn't work that way. You have to mobilize people within their own communities. They have the trust of their communities to make that work. And that is our point of view. You cannot say Kallie Kriel is going to now and AfriForum now as the solution for everybody. That would simply be paternalistic.
Piet?
Yeah, it's the same theme that Kallie is repeating, and you allow him to just repeat the same story, just use different words to keep on emphasizing the justifications for. Look, I was looking up for the statistics, but I'll be falling off my chair if it's true that only 700 so-called colored children passed matric with matric exemption. I'll be very surprised if that's true. Is that true, Kallie? Is that a fact, or is it just something that you just pop into your mind?
No. What we've done, for instance, in terms of academia...
No, just tell me that. Is that 700 true? Is that 700 right? Is that right?
That is the figures I have. If we have Heinrich Weingart, he actually has more figures in terms of what percentage of colored people
throughout South Africa, 700 so-called colored kids got university exemption, matric with university exemption. Is that what you say?
That is the figures I have, but of course,
I don't have a competing set of figures for you. But sometimes bullshit, you have a bullshit antenna. That it's not a swear word I'm using. One has a bullshit antenna, but if that figure doesn't in some other way just make your bullshit antenna vibrate, there must be something wrong. If that is what Heinrich Weingart says, I hope he's got a good source for that, because I will be absolutely astonished. Because just at Stellenbosch University last year, I think around that figure, if not more, got access to university. If you include the University of the Western Cape, Johannesburg University, it's not possible. So be careful for the facts that you work with. If you work with the wrong facts, you'll get to the wrong conclusions. And if Heinrich Weingart, and you look, I have my doubt about a number of people that is associated with you, but that's very personal in a sense, and that. But there's also factual evidence for it. If Heinrich says that, you must think about his leadership for the AfriForum again. It's the same when Ernst Roets get up in Parliament and I so much appreciated when a member of the DA said, I can associate with absolutely nothing that you've said. It's because you guys work with the wrong facts sometimes, yet you come to the wrong conclusions. And I'm not even talking about the fact that you use those wrong facts to justify some things. We know that education is in ruins in South Africa. And it is possibly true, and I think there's some evidence towards it, and Kallie has alluded to it, that yes, it does help a lot if you have mother tongue as a basic form of education. But, and I think it's a worthy research project on the take. We have a lot of universities, all universities, I taught at 4 universities, always a lot of students from Zimbabwe. Almost inevitably, those students that sit in those classes had English the first day at school, grade 1, because they got it from the church schools quite often, the Catholic schools, which teach them in English. They are vastly superior to the local students. In fact, analytically and comparatively, as a form of writing style, they do better than the children coming from Afrikaans schools who has perfect ability to replicate. In other words, memorize, write it down, and get a good mark for it. Their analytical ability is usually hampered by the fact that they tend to replicate. So the evidence that it's good to have Afrikaans school, yes, there is some evidence to that, but that's your second choice, the second option. A child that has grown up in a house where you don't have one father figure that tells you what you should think and how you should think about things, and you've learned from a very young age to speak in a language that's universal applicable, always will have an advantage over those that learn in Afrikaans only, or that grow up in a household where the father is speaking the last and the only truth in the household. So culture plays a role, but exposure is fundamentally important. Education is a more complicated thing than just to say, if you have we all must just get our first education in our mother tongue and all will be well. It is not true. There is no evidence that solves all the problems. It does solve some problems, but not all the problems.
Piet, some of our viewers might think the two of you are more enemies perhaps than you really are. Just for a more relative sense, I think there is probably some things that you'd agree that AfriForum and Cape Forum is doing right. Perhaps, am I wrong? Is there some things that you think that AfriForum and Cape Forum is doing right in terms of filling potholes or?
No, those are the small things. I think the fact they build a university is the right thing. I think the fact that Solidarity started a union or building a union that exists in the past, it's a good thing. I think if you broaden civil society interest into the economy or into the political system, it's a good thing. All those things are good things. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about much more complicated things than that.
Okay, and in terms of building a university, what would you see differently? For example, would you rather them stop focusing on mother tongue language and more universal form of education in South Africa?
I think it must build a university for everybody. They must start a union for everybody. I think Philip Base once at the meeting, he asked me, you have so much to say as a form of criticism, about what we should be doing in South Africa. What will you do different? So I'll start a union, I'll build a university, I'll build schools, I'll do all those things that you do, but I'll do it for everybody. And I think that's the answer to our problems, isn't that? To do something for everybody. Okay,
great. Kallie?
Well, I think the big challenge that we have is that we have to do some stuff that the government should be doing, but we don't have taxpayers' income to do all that. So our resources are spread thinly, and we do what we can. The fact is, if you have a community, and that is the power also of culture, if people want their children to be able to study in Afrikaans, they will be willing to contribute. If you're just going to create a replica from what we are seeing of the University of Johannesburg or WITS, then of course you won't have that cultural energy. So there's not a problem. I just want to refer to Heinrich that these figures that I've mentioned are not Heinrich's figures. What we did is is to start speaking to Soltech and to start speaking to academia to say, what can we do to make sure that we also provide access to Afrikaans education with regard to the colored community. And I'm not going to name a specific figure because I don't have it in front of me, but what I can say, what academia's figures showed is that if you look at a percentage per population group, the colored community is the community where the percentage of people going to study further is the lowest. So we need to address those kind of issues. And there's, for me, not a problem if a community comes to say that we want to start an institution to make sure in a society where Afrikaans is not going to be used on tertiary level, to make sure that we set up something like that, but it won't be exclusive. And you can go to Soltech and academia. Figures are few, but it is because there's a big struggle and there's not that big number of young people that can qualify to go there. So that is more or less the background with regard to the figures that I've mentioned.
Okay, gentlemen, this has been a very interesting discussion, perhaps not the one viewers might have expected, but still very interesting. Piet, I want to give you one last opportunity. Thank you again, gentlemen. Thank you so much for making the time to join us here. I want to give you one last opportunity, Piet, for a closing statement, anything you want to add as last words.
Yeah, look, at any discussion or conversation, for it to be fruitful is that the idea that instead of making your own point is to hear the other person's viewpoint, and much more important is to ask yourself the question, how did that particular person get to that viewpoint? What is the history of that viewpoint? And I think it's important because me and Kallie, our differences is in how did we get here and how do we formulate our ideas? Because unless we understand where we are, how did we get here, it will always be difficult to define the future as well. Not always. Most South Africans actually know that we come from a different past. We know the history. We know the atrocities of the past. We know the misunderstandings. And we say the Constitution is a document on which we can build at least on what we have in common. If we keep on emphasizing where we're coming from and our history and why we are special or different or diverse, it's always going to be hard to define a consensus about what the future should look like. And I think, honestly, if we, in the next few years, is what will save South Africa is what we agree on, not what we are different on.
Great. And Kallie?
Yes, I want to agree with Piet on one point, is that he said in these kind of debates, one should listen. And the point I was making time and time again is that we are not in isolation. We don't see ourselves as being at the head of the table. We're sitting on this round table in Southern Africa, and we have a specific solution that is starting to bear fruit, not only in terms of our constituency, but also those cultural communities we work with. And that, for me, is empowering in the sense that if you don't have a plan and you only see the failures of the ANC, then you become despondent and you believe there is no future and there's no hope. And I truly believe that our hope lies into empowering communities to make sure that they are able to promote issues and take on issues where government is failing. And of course, it's Piet's right to drive a different solution. And if he is successful with his solution, then I'll be glad. But at this stage, the only solution we see is the one we're working on.
Is he still intolerant, or does he just have a different opinion?
But,
yes, Kallie, good question. Good question. Kallie, answer it honestly now.
I don't want to give Piet a kiss of death, but I am going to. I communicate with him outside of this platform, and I will normally not call him intolerant, but I only respond to being called the dinosaur. So So no, Piet has a role to play. He doesn't need my permission or my stamp of approval, but it's important that we have a robust debate. A robust debate is not something that is wrong. I think when things go wrong, if people just simply agree on all issues and we all united in going for a wrong solution. So in that sense, Piet is not the enemy.
Great. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Still best friends. Thank you, gentlemen. To our viewers, is that going too far? Just friends, good friends.
Obviously. We can't bribe together, not me and Kallie. That'll be hard. So he'll bring his best friend Roots there, and that'll be disaster.
No, Piet is just denying. He actually likes me, but he doesn't have to say that on this forum.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much for making the time to join us here. To our viewers, you enjoyed this content, like this video, share it as wide as possible, spread their message, and subscribe to our channel. My name is Donald. You've been watching WorldView.